Welcome to Pick Up and Deliver, the podcast where I pick up my audio recorder when I head out for a stroll and deliver an episode to you while I walk around. I'm Brendan Riley. Well, good morning, listeners. It's a construction-heavy morning here in suburban Chicago, where the cloud cover is low and gloomy, and I might very well get rained on while I'm walking and talking to you today. Hopefully the background noise isn't too loud. It sounds really loud to me from here, but the microphone often just picks up a little bit of it, I've found, because it's pretty directional. So hopefully this part isn't completely lost and unusable. Well, I hope that you are having a pleasant day so far, dear listener. I am out for my constitutional before I dig into lots and lots of student responses to projects and whatnot. Today I am going to return to an old feature that I enjoy called board game Duel. On this one I picked two board games that I feel like have some similarities, and I talk about them together, thinking about which one rewards in which way and so on. Now, I looked through the past history of board game duels, and I don't think I talked about this game, so I think it's fair game to talk about again. And that game is Agricola. So what game should I pair off against Agricola? Perhaps the worker placement game that gets the most love in my collection lately, and that is Everdell. So, to be fair, I have mostly played Agricola online. I have played it a handful of times using the physical copy that I own, but I've played it probably a dozen or more times over on Boîte à Jeux, the online gaming platform, mostly with a single guy from the Blue Peg Pink Peg community named Kevin Barrent. I don't think Kevin listens, but if he does, hello, Kevin. So that's mostly where I play Agricola, although I'm always open to playing it more. If anybody wants to give it a try, I'm happy to run it around with you. Maybe after this discussion you will or won't want to. I'd also be happy to play Everdell, although I think the only digital way to play that is Tabletop Simulator, as far as I know. Okay, so quick introduction in case you aren't familiar with the games. Agricola is a classic worker placement game from, I believe, 2008, designed by Uwe Rosenberg, and it is about being a farmer in the Middle Ages. At the beginning of the game, you have two workers, farmer and farmer's wife, or male farmer and lady farmer, and that's it. You get two workers per round, and you have a two square house and a plot of land that you own. You start with 4 food saved up, and you have a set of cards. Now, the cards are what really makes Agricola interesting, so forgive me, I'm going to take a moment to talk about them. At the beginning of the game, depending on how you're playing, but my preferred mode for people who played before is the 9-card drafting mode. So the way this works is you get 9 occupation cards, which are things that your workers can be good at doing, and 9 minor improvement cards, which are small technologies that your workers could create. You take these 18 cards in your hand, and you pick out one of them that you want, of each category, and then you trade with the next player down the road and pick out one that you want, and so on, until you get 7 of each in your hand. Once you have 7 occupations and 7 minor improvements, then you're done drafting and you discard the rest. From then, you have 14 rounds of playing workers and building up your farm. And over that time, you're going to plow land and sow it and grow crops. You're going to buy animals, fence off pastures and grow the animals or raise the animals. You're going to upgrade your house, making it bigger, and then adding children who become workers to your farm, and so on. It is very much pure worker placement in the classic sense that you put a worker on a space and you get to do the action that space does. And having done so, you've now prevented anyone else from using that space this round. You can acquire first player turn order. You can acquire more workers. And at the end of the game, you are scored based on how well you developed your farm. You basically lose 1 point or 2 points for anything you didn't do. So if you don't have any sheep, you lose a point. If you don't have any pigs, you lose a point. If you don't have any cows, you lose a point. However, the points get much higher if you do things. So having, say, 5 sheep is worth, 8 points. So it might be worth your while to concentrate on sheep and have 5 at the end rather than making sure you get 1 sheep and 1 pig, because that 1 pig will only save you losing 1 point. You get what I'm saying. I'll talk more about how the game plays as we're comparing the two. The other game in the duel today is Everdell. Everdell's theme is it is a group of anthropomorphic animals setting up a city around a big tree called the Ever Tree. The idea is you are competing with other settlements to build the best town in the region of Everdell, which is this sort of magical forest land. Think of Redwall if you're familiar with that. Book series by Brian Jacques. The designer of Everdell is James Wilson, and it's published by Starling Games. Agricola is published by Z-Man, I believe. Might be Lookout Games now. In Everdell, at the beginning of the game, you only have 2 workers, and you can either place a worker or build a building. To build a building, you actually don't need to use a worker. You use your workers to gather resources, and then you build buildings or recruit critters by playing them out of your hand or out of the market and paying the resource cost. There are a couple engine accelerators in Everdell. When you build a building, there's a little icon in the corner that indicates 1 critter that you can get for free. To get that critter, you have to have the card. So you either have the card in your hand or you have the card in the shared marketplace. And then on your turn, you activate that building's free critter and you take the critter and put it into your tableau. So leveraging this push-pull between building a building and then getting a free critter out of it, and using the critters and their abilities to get more resources, which then speed up the building of buildings, is a key part of the game. Thing is, the buildings that are easier to build are faster to build, and the critters often give you more stuff but don't give you very many points. And of course, the cards that give you lots of points generally cost more stuff to make and don't give you a whole lot. In fact, there are some cards that just give you more points. The other big challenge of the game, once you've built your 2 workers and once you've used your 2 workers and exhausted your cards, then you get to advance your season. Advancing your season allows you to take your workers back. It allows you to get 1 more worker, or sometimes 2 more workers, and it allows you to do whatever the special action is before you go to the next season. Now, the big thing about Everdell is not everyone advances to this next season at the same time. So you have this interesting push-pull where you're trying to hold off advancing so that you can outlast your opponent and have more advantage at the end of the game. On the other hand, the first person to advance their season then is going to be able to snag up those worker spots when the other people advance their seasons and remove them from the worker spots. So there's this weird kind of push-pull. The game also accelerates as you go along because you get more workers. At the beginning you start with 2, by the end of the game you'll have 6, thus you're able to take more actions in the rounds. The limitation in Everdell, weirdly, because when you start to play the game, it feels very slow, like you're not getting anything done. The limitation at the end of the game is you always run out of spots, or I have. Every time I've played, I run out of spots, because you're only allowed to put 15 buildings and critters into your tableau, and so once you have 15, you're stuck. You can't add more. There are other ways to use things to get points, but such a big part of it is the critters and buildings that it feels rough when you run out of space and you wanted to build 1 more thing. And you almost always do want to do that. That's Everdell. Like I said, the theme is anthropomorphic animals, so lots of cute squirrels and badgers and birds and stuff. Doing things like being postal clerks or being professors or that sort of thing. So let's compare these 2 games. We'll start with theme. So Agricola is about medieval farming. Everdell is about building a town with a medieval flavor, but with cute little animals. So Everdell wins hands over fist. Both games have lots of resources, and later versions of Agricola have more refined resources. I'm sure you could buy fancy bits, so you could play Agricola with little plastic corn. But the long and short of it is that the theme of Everdell is more fun. You have these cute little animals, lots of art on all the cards. There's not a whole lot of art involved in Agricola, and what's there is Clemens Franz, which is very functional, very Euro-style, medieval-type art. Ultimately, the theme of the game is you are running a medieval farm. The other part of Agricola that feels rough is that it is really hard to do well. Especially, for most of the game, it feels very hard to do well. Especially because the one thing I mentioned Agricola has, which Everdell forgoes, is the requirement to feed your people. A lot of older style Euro games had this constant drain on your economy that you were required to wrestle with, in which you had to figure out how to feed your workers each round or every other round or something. And often this feeding requirement is high enough or strong enough that you have to work pretty hard to build the engine that will do it. And the early part of the game is almost always focused, at least some percentage, on building up an engine that allows you to feed your workers without having to work too hard at it, so that later you can do other things. Everdell does not have that drain. And as a result, while the beginning of Everdell feels tight, later in the game can feel very loose and expansive. Agricola, you're always haunted by that need to feed your workers, and it never entirely goes away. You have to use actions every couple rounds to make sure you have enough food to provide for your family. Now, maybe in the last few rounds you could get away without doing it, but it's rare. And the penalty for failing to feed your family in Agricola is really harsh. Each food that you're missing costs you 3 resources, or 3 points at the end of the game. So if you're supposed to feed your family 4 food and you somehow screw up and don't have any, that's 12 points you've lost in a game where a good score is 40 or 50. So that is rough. So in terms of theme, I think Everdell wins out. Very few people look at Agricola and say, oh, medieval farming, now that is the theme for me. And a lot of people really don't like the feed my family mechanic, and the game has acquired a nickname in some places as Misery Farm. In terms of theme, I think Everdell wins out. In terms of the tight versus loose economy, we talked about this a little bit already, but Agricola has a much tighter economy than Everdell, I think. Good Everdell players, like my wife, can often, as the game goes along, have a surfeit of points hanging around waiting for them to spend, or a surfeit of resources. So they'll have extra berries, extra wood, extra resin, and so on. Whereas in Agricola, it's pretty rare that I feel like I have extra anything. Maybe in the last couple of rounds I might have a couple extra sheep, but generally those are also related to points, so the economy stays tight the whole time. Plus in Agricola, your food demands go up. Like I said, you can have a child, you can add to your farm and have a child, and one of the keys to success in Agricola is building your farm up to the maximum 5 rooms and getting your workforce up to the maximum 5 workers. You get points for both of those things, but also you're able to do a lot more because you get 5 turns in a round instead of 2. Everdell, because of the free workers on cards and because of the various ways that you can do things without using a worker, you can get way more actions out of a round if you're lucky and good. So the economy in Agricola feels much tighter, and the word punishing I've heard thrown around about Agricola, and I don't think that's unreasonable. But yeah, I think, Agricola has the tighter economy than Everdell. I'm not sure which one wins that way, because that's part of what makes those games interesting. Cards. This is a crucial one, and this goes, cards and randomness, we'll say, go together. So like I said, in Agricola at the beginning, you have this drafting mode, which is the preferred way to play, I think, where you're drafting the cards that you're going to use. And often these give you the focus for your strategy. So for instance, in one of the games of Agricola I'm playing right now, I got to acquire a couple different cards that leverage having sheep. I got a card that gives me a bonus for having lots of sheep in my menagerie. I got a card that gives me food bonus for having lots of sheep. It's like the manure master or something. Like I can benefit from having lots of sheep manure on my farm, then I can grow more food. I think I got one other one too that gives me something for sheep. I think I got one where I get a bonus for having extra sheep in the pens, and I got another one that lets me have more sheep in a pen than usual. Those play off each other. So looking at your cards and looking at your minor improvements and deciding which ones you're going to use and how you're going to leverage those cards into your play is a crucial part of the game. Another aspect of it is that you're only going to play, maybe if you're really aggressive about playing them, a third of the cards of your 7 occupations and your 7 minor improvements. You're maybe going to play 3 or maybe 4 occupations, but you have to pay food for the later occupations too, because you have to spend energy learning those things. So the first occupation you get's free, the second one costs 1 food plus an action to get it, the third one another action and 2 food, and so on. So it takes effort to get these extra occupations, which admittedly give you bonuses that help make the rest of your engine function better, but are really challenging. But having these occupations is what makes Agricola run so well and such an interesting game, even though it's essentially the same game every time. When you're playing Agricola, you know sometime in the middle of the game, you're going to get the spot that allows you to start having kids. And you know that sometime toward the end of the game, there's going to be a spot that allows you to have one kid, even if you don't have that fifth room in your house, which can be crucial if you're behind on the race to make kids and rooms in your house. So kind of knowing what the game is going to allow you to do and roughly when, although it is a little randomized, combined with the randomness of those cards, is what makes Agricola special and puts it above, at least in some reviewers' minds, games like Caverna. Now, I haven't tried Caverna myself, so I can't speak to it, but I think the variety in Caverna comes from slightly other sets of things. But that's Agricola's randomness. Everdell's randomness is slightly different. Part of it comes from which expansions you use. That will change. I guess that changes the board setup rather than the randomness. But you do get randomness in setup, like Agricola's occupation cards. In Everdell, there are 5 or 6 permanent action slots on the board and 4 variable ones, and you deal out cards to those spots at the beginning of the game. So there's maybe a deck of 15 or 20 variable worker spots, and those are the ones that come out at the beginning that shape the game. There are also lots of variable scoring conditions which shape which kinds of buildings and critters you're going to be trying to get. So that part of Everdell is where the variability comes in. That said, Everdell also has a lot of tactical play because you don't know when you're going to have a card. You know, you could build a palace and hope to get a free king out of it, and then you never draw the king or never see a king in play. And other players could have drawn them and discarded them, and you never would have known. So Everdell has an element of randomness there that can really be swingy in a way that Agricola does not. Agricola has a little randomness, but it's almost all at the beginning, and after that it's pretty set. The one difference would be that you never know quite the order that those last worker spaces are going to come out, so you could have something where you're really hoping to get pigs early, and the pig card comes out in the last spot that it could, and it could mess you up that way. So I guess that addresses variability as well. Both games have low variability, I would say. Once you've played them a couple times, they're going to play similar every time. The way that they feel different is in the tactical nature of the game, that you have to adapt your strategy, your approach to the set of cards or set of resources that you have at the beginning. And as the game goes along, it will offer you a few more here and there, and your strategy has to follow what you have rather than what you wish you had. Both games do that pretty well, I think. So, last thoughts on the duel between Agricola and Everdell. Right now I prefer Everdell. It's the beautiful art, the fun components, the variety of things you can do in your play tells me I have more fun playing it. Also, frankly, my wife likes to play it, and so does my daughter, so it gets onto the table in a way that Agricola does not. As much as I've talked it up, my wife has never wanted to try Agricola. I think as soon as I said, and if you don't feed your workers, you lose 3 points for every food you're missing, she'd be like, nope, let's try Everdell again. So that puts Everdell up significantly for me, right? The ability to play it makes a big difference. I suspect if there were some platonic way to evaluate how good a game really is, that Agricola is a better game. I feel like the strategic nature of the cards that you get at the beginning makes Agricola a puzzle that is solvable and then depends on your skill in terms of reading the other players when you take actions off the spaces, and that sort of thing, in a way that Everdell just does not. Everdell still has some of those. In fact, there are some cards that are really great. We have the Pearlbrook expansion, and there are some pirate cards that can really rock your opponent in pretty serious ways. Agricola does not have that. It is entirely the classic passive-aggressive, I take the spot you wanted, bit of worker placement, as well as the pushing your luck. In this most recent game, for instance, there was a round where there were 2 pigs, and I thought I was going to get them, and I let them sit for a round so that I could more optimally use them once I had gotten them. And by waiting another turn, my opponent took them instead. And, he might have taken them because he could see I was gearing up to take them. And that, more power to him. That might happen here in this last round. I'm just about to go home. And if he takes the read that I need, I won't be able to turn my house into stone. But that would have been my own fault for waiting as long as I did to get the thing I got. But I got other things instead. such is the game. So, if you have an opportunity to try out Agricola and Everdell, I recommend both. I believe that Agricola is probably the stronger game, but Everdell looks more fun on the table and is probably something you could find other people to play with you more easily right now. If you want to try Agricola asynchronously, you can reach out to me on Boîte à Jeux or over on our Board Game Geek Guild 3269. Also weigh in on what you think of this matchup. Which game do you like better and why? I look forward to hearing from you, and until next time, I hope your next walk is as pleasant as mine was. Bye-bye.
Brought to you by Rattlebox Games.